Now, a lot of stuff to work through, but I guess you've already heard some of these themes today. The first is history has returned. If you think the next 80 years will be like the 80 years we experienced recently, you're dreaming. If you think we should take the side of the people who are vandalizing the Western alliance and the Western values today, you are wrong. We need to be in the group that is going to be building up the opposition to the damage on democracies we're seeing around the world. As history returns, we have one chance to do the right thing. If we side with the wrong side, our international reputation will be trashed, and we will be a margin of nothing, and we will find it hard to access markets and sell our stuff. Having said that really terrible news, the reality is that the longer-term picture for food is extraordinarily positive, especially if we can carve out a niche for ourselves, which is not just about selling protein, but actually selling good quality food that rich people want. That's really where the game is. We have to stop talking about food as a whole, and we really do need to talk about quality a great deal. And what I mean by that is the result that we should see on our farms is not how many sheep or how many cows or what weight is being produced, but how much money are we producing for ourselves as profits, and how much wages are we paying for our workers. So I'll try and explain some of that context through my presentation now. I'll talk a little bit about some of the effective levers that are in your hands, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I think people might be a superpower, because that is one thing that you can do inside of your business that you have control over. Quite often the conversations we have in industry gatherings is around what's happening in the world, what's happening in regulation, what's happening, all those things that are external. But we speak very little about the things that we do as business people inside our own organizations that we have the biggest control over and could have the biggest impacts. I want to just touch briefly on the global stuff because I think it is seismic and it is important from that external context. There is plenty of good news, and the good news is the world is getting better. The bad news is the world is also getting worse. And what I mean by that is over the course of the last 100 years, we've lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. You can see that picture on the left-hand side. But what you can also see on the right-hand side is we've seen an increase in polarization amongst communities because while we have reduced inequality between countries, we have increased inequality within countries. Within places of Europe, in places like New Zealand, in places like the US, what we have seen is inequality has risen and there is anger and there's fracturing in societies. The anger that you see in Brexit, the rise of the far right, the rise of Trump and Trump again, these are not somehow isolated incidents, but they're a reaction against people saying, I don't think I'm getting a fair deal. I want to change and I want it now. I don't care if it hurts me, I want to get those bastards as well. This period of angry politics is going to be with us for some time to come, and we should assume it will affect us in New Zealand because we benefited so much from that 80 years of stability and consensus on how it was that we should be running the world. When it came to geopolitics in terms of military and defense, when it came to economic policies, when it came to trade, you heard before we were talking about the WTO. What do you think the WTO would be if most countries don't care what bindings it provides? What position would New Zealand be in if we do not have a supranational agency that enforces trade rules? The answer is we'll be on the back foot. And when it comes to climate, we're going to see a huge amount of fracturing in terms of who's going to support what kinds of policies. And the consequence of that is we're going to see politics that's going to become very volatile. And that's because there is no center. The idea that there is this broad consensus of people who are going to hold democracies together is clearly not true. Clearly not true. You look at the US, the democracy there is under attack. If a democracy like America's can be undermined by one president, what do you think is going to happen around the world over the coming 80 years? And we're going to see that in the consequences of rising spending on military, more borrowing, we're just going to have less money for other stuff. It's going to make the population even angrier. And I'll make a very confident prediction. We are going to see more frequent changes of government, and as a result, more frequent changes of policies, and as a result, more uncertainty for all of us. If those of you who might celebrate the fact that the current government is pausing some policies, good. It gives you some space to breathe. What's to say in a year and a half times there's not going to be a change of government that changes those policies again? Do not assume that what you're seeing today can be extrapolated out to the future, you should assume that politics and policy will be volatile and it will be unstable and unpredictable. You should not be running your business to the minimum of regulations. You need to have a buffer because regulations will change and they'll bite you in the butt if you don't move quickly. And this is a picture that shows you that we are not immune. I have never seen another economic and another political cycle where within the first half of a term, the existing government is unpopular. It has never happened in my working career. This is the first time within a year and a half that New Zealanders have gone, this government we have just elected, we don't like what you're doing, we don't think you're doing a good job. Extraordinary. Generally speaking, New Zealanders give our governments at least 2 terms to muck things up. Right? What do you think will happen to those policies that you think are discouraging for you and are currently paused? What do you think is going to happen if there's a change of government in a year and a half's time? Can you predict, can you plan your business because we're going to have stable policies to plan for in our future? I don't think so. So the politics is probably far more important as a source of uncertainty than we have been used to, and it is in a much bigger way, and it's much more important for us to be absolutely plugged in to creating long-term, consistent, bipartisan policies when it comes to the things that affect us. We have to take off our personal political hats, and we need to focus on what is good for our industry and good for our country. Now, the reality is that even though we've got these big things that are happening around the world, the reality is there's some big positives for New Zealand. The first is, of course, the reason why we're a farming country is we're a fucking big country, right? I think that's the term for it. If you overlay New Zealand over the top of the UK or over the top of Europe, you can see just how big we are as a country. Of course, we have a bunch of big mountain ranges in the South Island, but even with that, we have an enormous amount of land, and we have a, relatively speaking, excellent climate. The temperate climate really does put us in a really strong position. The other thing that really protects us in some ways is because we're just so far from everything, right? If you draw a 2,000-kilometer radius around Wellington, there is no big navy. If you draw a 2,000-kilometer radius around Berlin, it's so many borders, so many militaries, and it also includes Putin. So there are some real big challenges in countries like that that we are not going to face. It doesn't mean we're immune, but it does mean that we are going to see we're going to be a little bit protected from some of those big pressures that are affecting other countries around the world. The other thing that protects us a little bit is we are becoming much more diversified as a country. So on the left-hand side is a picture of our exports, and you can see that our share of exports in meat, dairy, forestry, that has changed over time. But the orange line at the top is probably the one that's most interesting. It's all those other things that we export. Look how much that has grown over the course of the last several decades. New Zealand is becoming more diverse. They're not very big industries, but they're diverse industries. We're doing more. Same thing when you look at the countries that we export to. Yes, China is our top trading partner. Yes, US is our second biggest export destination. But look at that orange bar. We are trading to lots more countries. Our connections are becoming much more diverse. Therein lies our strength. If you think about this coming 80 years, when the geopolitics will be uncertain, where the policies will be uncertain, our power will be trying to diversify our relationships and strengthen and deepen those relationships. What we should not try to do is isolate ourselves by shooting ourselves on the foot. We should not be rushing into decisions that will make us pariahs with people who are going to be creating the new groups and the new collections. We want to be the ones who want to be in the new clubs, not the people who get left out. Now, there's a bunch of reasons why I think we should be optimistic. I'm quite a black-headed kind of guy. I'm quite negative. I see all the bad things that might happen, so this is kind of a little bit of an antidote. And the antidote, of course, is that despite all the bad news, the world is still getting richer and better. And this is a nice little case study of what happened in Korea. So Korea went through this massive kind of industrialization process, and this is happening in other countries in different speeds. Whether it's India or it's in Indonesia or Malaysia, they're all developing very, very quickly. And you can see on the left-hand side that very rapid growth, and what you can see on the right-hand side, as these countries get richer, they simply consume huge amounts more protein, which we are wanting to sell to them. And if you look at the case of Korea, what happened over the course of the time as they got richer, they started to consume a lot more chicken, a lot more oils, a lot more pork, a lot more beef, a lot more sheep meat. And you can see those highlighted in the orange there. But what's also true is that culture plays a big role, right? Even though we've seen countries like Japan also get much richer over time, their consumption of things like beef just didn't increase as much because their culture is simply not as aligned towards consuming beef as it is in some of those other places. So we have to be really careful in understanding our consumers. And I was in this room before when we were talking about adding more value, and I think the big message I heard was, we're not producing a product. We're producing a thing that somebody consumes on the other side. We really need to not be saying goodbye to our product at the port. We also need to think about the people who are consuming on the other side. What are they wanting to consume? Can we give them what they want? Because the closer we are to the markets, the more we understand, the better it is. One sad thing, though, is while we are trying to feed the world, we are not feeding New Zealanders. This horrifies me. I just got a survey out last week of a bunch of data that showed that a quarter of New Zealanders went without a meal some of the times in the past 12 months. A quarter of New Zealanders. It's a shocking statistic. And this kind of shows up in this data set. That orange box that I've highlighted shows you the share of households that are buying meat on a weekly basis. In the 80s and 90s, it was around, and early 2000s, 80 to 90% of households would buy meat on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. In the last year, it was around 2/3, 60-odd%. 40% of households did not buy meat in a given week in New Zealand. It's all very well for us to feed the world, but if we're not feeding our own people, where do we think our social license is going to come from? Do we really think that we will have social license with our people if we keep making it harder and harder for people to have a dignified life where they can afford the things that they want? Now, despite that, I think the surprising thing you might see in this set of slides is actually people don't dislike us at all. I've been going around the country talking to lots of food and fiber folk and dairy folk, and there is a real fear in the room that nobody likes us. It's terrible. I feel a bit sad. So I looked at the survey. Do people really hate farmers? No. Something like 70% of New Zealanders have a positive view of farmers. When it comes to farming, within the segments of farming, this is survey results from last year, something like 65% of New Zealanders have good and positive views about sheep and beef farming. We're a bit on the lower side than some of the other folk, but it's absolutely not true that New Zealanders don't like you. I think most of the time we don't think about you. Right? Our main connection with you is when I go to the supermarket and buy food, right? We're not thinking about those other things. And partly because most of us have moved away from rural connections and we have very little connection with farms and those kinds of things. I grew up in Lincoln, but my connection with dairy farming is it used to be on the other side when I used to walk to uni, right? So the social license is actually still there in New Zealand. I think for us it's more about maintaining it rather than earning it. We are in a much stronger position than many other parts of New Zealand. But if you're going to maintain social license, the lens and how we think about ourselves and how we talk about ourselves, I think matters. One lens of it might be through the lens of productivity. That's something that we talk about a lot in New Zealand, and that's because we've really kind of been struggling to grow productivity in New Zealand in the last decade or so. So you can see the picture on the left-hand side. New Zealand's productivity generally increases. There's been 2 periods when it hasn't grown. The first period was when a drunk uncle was in charge. There was Muldoon. And then it was the last decade, right? And I don't know who the drunk person was, but we seem to have really run out of mojo. What's interesting, though, when you look at the composition of why that productivity growth has slowed, is our previous superstars have stopped being productive. And what I mean by that, our primary sector and our manufacturing sectors were becoming more and more productive right through that period of New Zealand's history. The services sector is always very gradual, right? Because it's hard. But our primary sector and our manufacturing sector were doing phenomenally, and those segments have absolutely lost pace. You can see on the right-hand side that picture of productivity growth in the food and fiber sector. It went from growing at 3 to 4% a year, which is extraordinary, year in, year out, and that has collapsed, and now we are just like everybody else. So we used to carry that mantle of productivity growth, innovation, making prosperity growth in New Zealand, but we have really lost that momentum. It is our loss of productivity that we're seeing showing up in the big data sets. Now, there's huge variation within industries, and productivity is a really stupid word, right? What does it even mean for a real business and a real person? What it means in a very practical sense is what is the wage that you're creating per person plus the profits that you're creating per person. That's really what productivity is when I measure it as an economist. Are you making more profits, and are you creating better jobs and better pay? That's really what we're talking about. And you can see in that picture behind me the rough kind of picture of the different segments of the food and fiber sector and where we sit. So the dairy sector is very much on the highest in terms of productivity, and then sheep and beef kind of falls in next to it. So we're not poor in terms of the quality of productivity, but certainly there is quite a lot of, the big issue is not that we're not earning enough or creating enough returns, it's more that we're not growing at the moment. A lot of the conversations when it comes to the primary sector and export, it turns into exports, right? Are we going to export more? For example, we want to double our exports. I love slogans like that. It sounds really good, right? We're going to double it, so of course we're all going to get richer. But it turns out just because you're increasing revenue doesn't mean you're increasing profits or getting better at it. Sometimes it's just doing more and working harder but not getting better. And that to me is pointless. There's no point in growing an industry if we're not going to get more profitable and if we're not going to get more successful in looking after our people. So we really have to think very hard about what is the metric of success that we're talking about. The meat sector is absolutely a big exporter, right? And we're exporting massive amounts. It's growing over time. You can see the picture on the left-hand side. I think quite often we talk about nominal terms. It's kind of pointless. The volume term is much more interesting because that shows you that there is a steady progress over time. So there is that. You look at the picture on the right-hand side, and that's the context of how important we are within the context of the New Zealand economy. That is the export of wool and meat in all of New Zealand, and you can see that it's important, but it's quite small. And when people come and tell you that, we are the backbone of the economy and all that kind of stuff, that's well and fine for us to feel special. But the reality is in any economy, it's a collection of lots of people who have to work together to make this work, right? I add value in my way, you add value in your way, we're all important. So when somebody goes, I'm more important than you, that's just your insecurity that's coming out. Let's just grow up and just focus on what we can do. We are doing okay. We are doing the best that we can in our own business to look after ourselves, look after our people, and look after our community. And that's enough. We don't need to be backbone of the country. We don't need to have this extra special status. Stop being childish. And the reason I say stop being childish is because it doesn't win us any friends. I think it's much more important that we focus on the levers that we can pull that makes us richer and makes our workers better off, because that's where the rubber hits the road. And I just wanted to break down that growth of exports over the course of the last 30 years, or 29 years, and show you where that composition of growth came from. And you can see that massive amounts of growth in export revenue, nearly $7 billion. It's incredible, right? It's a huge amount. But then you can see that orange bar, a huge bunch of it was just inflation. And we benefited massively from the growth of commodity prices. Great, take it, because the world wants our stuff. And then you can see how much of the growth was actually volume of exports and how much of it was value added. So it's not true that there are no good news stories that we could celebrate. We actually have lots of good news that's happening within our industry. It's not that we're just exporting more quantity of stuff. We're actually adding more value. The question is, can we do even more? Because that's where the benefit will come from. When I look at New Zealand's share across the global economy, we are absolutely tiny, right? Across the top 20 markets that we export to, New Zealand is about 5% of their markets. By and large, we're losing market share. By and large, we're losing market share because countries like China and India and most of Asia are growing really, really fast, but our growth is not as fast as the overall market. So we're losing market share in markets that are growing. And that to me speaks volumes, that we can participate, but we can't keep up. So if we're not going to be volume producers, what will we be? Do we want to do something different? And if that is the case, how are we going to do it? What does it actually look like? But I also don't really like revenue, because revenue doesn't mean anything, right? Because fundamentally, at the end of the year, when I want to go pay my taxes, what I really care about, did I make profit? If I had to use lots of subcontractors and lots of other people to earn my revenue, it's not much money in my back pocket. And unfortunately, that's really what happens in most industries, right? When you earn your money, a huge amount of that will be spent on purchases from suppliers. And you can see this is for the sheep and beef and cattle grain farming sector. And you can see in the very top line, we earn about $12 billion in revenue in total as a sector. We pay a small amount of it in wages and salaries. And then can you see the second big orange bar? That's all the money we spend on everybody else, from fertilizer to consultants to buying kit or whatever. Huge amount of money that's being spent on that stuff. And then you can see what's left over in EBITDA. And after all the bits have been taken out, the bit at the bottom is your NPAT. And the sort of shaded green bar at the bottom is essentially our GDP contribution, our wages plus our profits. And what I'm trying to explain to you is, what is it that we're trying to talk about? What are the things that we really want to leverage? What's the magic that we're trying to unlock? Because the reality is that I really, really hate it when people talk to me about revenue, because it's a stupid thing to talk about. Revenue means nothing. All that matters is, I want your business to be more profitable. I want your workers to be better off. I want you to succeed. Exports are by businesses to businesses or to consumers. There is no such thing as the industry of New Zealand, right? You guys are a collection of individuals and farms and teams that are doing it together. Now, what we have seen within our sector, of course, is that we've seen these pressures that have been building for some years, and we're seeing those changes in land use really coming through. And the fact that our profitability has been under pressure shows up in this data set. You can see that the amount of land that's in sheep, beef, and deer and goat has been trending down over a long period of time. Some of that change in land use has been towards forestry, but not all of it. What's surprising to me is that, unlike the dairy sector, which has gone through this massive amount of consolidation in the course of the last couple of decades, we haven't seen the same happening in sheep and beef yet. We seem to be a little bit stuck when it comes to that. And you can kind of see that in the statistics on the right-hand side in terms of the size of farms in New Zealand. Most of our sheep and beef farms are relatively small, right? We are kind of in that 2,000 to 5,000 stock unit range. I was talking to somebody before and he said, I've got a small farm, only 10,000 or 12,000 units. I'm like, looking at the distribution, you're way on the right-hand side rather than on the normal side. There will be things that will happen in our industry if we're to grow and if we're to succeed in this new feature, which is more uncertain and which will require us to work and think differently. We are going to have to think really differently because we haven't seen that shift happen yet. There's a question in my mind whether we're spreading our people too thin. So even though we've seen the amount of land that we're farming reducing over time, the number of workers hasn't really fallen very much. And essentially the amount of hectares per workforce, this is all both self-employed and employees, you can see that it has been kind of going pretty much sideways for the last little while. And the reason why I worry about that is we seem to be spreading ourselves thinner. And as a result, we're starting to see the amount of time that we lose to injuries creeping up. That's like one of those indicators I look at, just go, is our work safe? Is our work efficient? Is our work done the right way? Because if it is, we will not see those numbers creeping up as they're on the right-hand side. We lose close to 2% of our workforce time to injuries in this industry. The average days lost to injuries has been increasing over time. It's not a characteristic that's only for the sheep and beef sector. This is happening across almost every industry. We are getting rid of those minor injuries, but we're getting worse at those other injuries. So it's kind of almost, we're getting the left-hand tail of easy to fix things done, but those other things that we are getting hurt by, they're actually getting worse and harder. Now, what really matters, and the reason why I'm trying to kind of talk about all this stuff, is because fundamentally I think I'd like you to talk about your net profits, and I'd like you to talk about how you're rewarding your workers. Because those are the two things that really matter at the end of it. You happen to be sheep and beef farmers, but actually you are business folk, right? What you're running is a business which happens to be in farming. You're a business person first and a farmer second. And when you're a business person, the thing that you're trying to optimize is, have I got enough profits and have I got the right people and am I rewarding them to the best of my ability? And that's what that picture behind me tries to show you. And the very first kind of green bars is the average wage per farm. If we could look at the second green bar, that's the net profit per farm. And the gray shaded area is all the other stuff we give out to everybody else in taxes and fees and whatnot, right? We have made progress. So we should be really, really pleased to the statistics that our industry is in fact making progress. We are gradually becoming more profitable, but you can see in that picture that the returns to labor is the bit that's consistent. The returns to the farm owners is the one that's been quite variable and is one that's not growing very much. So if you are not able to reward yourself with the hard work that you do, are you doing it right? What is it for if you're not going to be better off? I want you to be better off because this is what really matters. This is a very busy picture, and there is a reason why I wanted to kind of show you this very busy picture, because this is my mental model of how productivity actually works in the economy. So productivity is roughly the outputs, wages and profits, divided by the inputs, the capital, the labor, and how we use those two things, right? And there are three questions. Don't worry about the detail, but there are three questions that we really need to ask ourselves. Is what's available out there? What's the best technology that's available? What's the kind of skills and qualifications that are available? We need to have knowledge and understanding of what's the best possible thing that's available out there for my industry. The second thing is, do I have it? Can I afford to get the right people in my business? Can I afford to have the right genetics on my farm? Can I get the right kit on my farm? And am I able to make use of the kit that we have and the people that we have to make it work? And the final question that I want you to ask yourself is, can I use the best kit that's available, that's on my business, with the people that I have? And the magic of that, can I use it, is a really hard answer. And it's a hard answer because how you make the most out of the people and the kit that you have inside of your business is actually with good leadership, good management, and good culture. Some of you might tell me that's soft, fluffy stuff. Yeah? Well, if you think that's soft and fluffy, you should not be in business. That is the fundamental of good business. Good leaders with good managers and good culture create fantastic businesses. That is the magic of a good business. That is the bit that we have to invest in if we want to make it better. So think about that from when we see business working in the way that it is. Ask yourself, how much of it was because of me and how much of it was because of stuff that was external? Because the things that were because of you and your team are the things that you can replicate, grow, improve over time. The people inside your business, including you, are the superstars of this industry. We know that we are going to be competing harder and harder for workers. We're already doing this. And you can see this kind of the story coming through in the picture on the left-hand side. The total number of people who are working in the sheep and beef sector has been shrinking over time, right? Not surprising because the sector is using less land over time. But you can see that most of the shrinkage is happening within the people who are self-employed, so mainly the farm owners. The number of people who work as employees has been pretty stable. And what you can see is that that picture on the right-hand side, we are competing harder and harder to get those people onto our farms. The median wage of somebody who works on a farm is now the same as the income the self-employed person pays themselves. You have to pay your workers as much as you pay yourself to be able to get people onto your farm. That's an extraordinary statistic because I don't see that in any other industry. We know that we are going to be ahead of the curve of every industry within the food and fiber sector in terms of looking for workers, because we're old. There's nothing wrong with being old, but the problem is it gets harder and harder for us in terms of how quickly we have to be changing our workforce. You can roughly see that picture on the left-hand side, the share of our workers who are in that 45 plus groups, you can see much, much bigger than the overall economy. If you can, so is that the right one? No, that's the next one. So this is the tenure of length. Sorry, I got overzealous. I was talking about the next slide already. On the left-hand side is a picture of how long people stay in our industry. So the good news is there are some people who stay in our industry a hell of a long time. Unfortunately for us, most of those people are really old. So when they exit the industry, we're going to lose a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge very, very quickly. And if you look at the right-hand side, you can see within our industry, within 2 years, once we hire somebody, we lose roughly about half of them within 12 months, and we lose about 2/3 of them within 2 years. So the churn and burn that we're creating in the labor market is really, really big. And I think it's going to speed up because the number of people in our industry are so old. Like I said, nothing against old people. It's just that they will retire because the work you do is hard work, physically hard work. And you can see how we are at the very top in terms of the share of our workers who are older in the 44 plus age group. Now, if you're 44, you're not old. I'm 44. I feel your pain. But the reality is that we know that we've got less time to prepare than other parts of the farming sector. You can see that in other farming, yes, they're also older, but a lot less than us, and certainly similar to the overall economy. The picture on the right-hand side is why I worry about what is going to take place. If you look at the share of New Zealanders who are aged between 16 and 64, it is falling forevermore. Regardless of how much immigration we have, we will never have enough young people ever again. So we know that the pressures are much worse in provincial New Zealand because our biggest export from the provinces is young people, right? And so that is a real challenge for us. Don't say yes to that. I don't want you to leave. We might need you here. No, you should go where you like because we want you to spread your wings and have as many great opportunities as you can. The story about aging population is that our labor market will become more and more competitive, and we're going to have to work really hard to make sure that we make the most of the opportunities that are there. Am I out of time already? She's looking at me, giving me daggers.
I'm smiling with them.
I'm 2 slides away. The reason I gave you that brick story is, to start with, the world is going to be uncertain. There'll be more volatility in politics and policy. It is not going to be isolated to the world. It is also going to happen here. The political and policy uncertainties will come to New Zealand. If you think about what you can control, it's not those things, but what you can do inside of your business. Leadership, management, culture, and the people you have on your business are going to be the things that will matter the most. We know the biggest kind of skills that we are currently looking at is we're going to need people, of course, with the hard and technical skills, but when you think about the future people you want in your organization, we're going to need people with problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, leadership skills, and communication skills. Again, they feel like soft skills, but those are going to be the critical skills that we're going to need to be able to upskill and grow our businesses. To be able to get the best technologies that are out there into our business will require us to upskill our people inside our organizations. How do we upskill our people the best? The evidence is really clear. The most effective forms of training is on-the-job training, teaching people on your farm by you, the expert, somebody who's experienced, is the most effective, followed by in-house training, followed by mentoring, followed then by vocational training and formal education. The reason I tell you this is because there is a huge amount of control that sits inside of your own organizations that you can do that will unlock potential in your own people inside of your organization. So the reason I wanted to talk about the people is because I think it's really hard for us to have that humility to say, what can I do to myself to make my business harder? I've been doing this roadshow with Dairy New Zealand and Dairy Women's Network, and we had a farmer talk about his leadership journey, and he said the hardest thing was to go from being a farmer to becoming a leader, and that was really hard. But that meant really for him to learn what it means to be a leader. And I think that's an open invitation that if you want your business to succeed in this environment that is increasingly uncertain and unpredictable, we should be investing in ourselves first. Give permission to invest in yourself, in your leadership skills in particular. Invest in your people for their management and invest in your organization for the culture. When you invest in your people, it's not just about formal qualification. A huge amount is the informal stuff I talked about before. Those things don't cost very much and they work better than other forms of qualification and education. Recruit for attributes rather than looking for the perfectly formed people. There is no such thing as a perfectly formed person. You want to recruit people for attributes so you can skill them up, so they become so trained, so qualified, so specialized that they can't leave your industry. You train them so much that they get paid too much in your industry to go somewhere else. And there is some stuff that we need to work on. We have to coordinate as an industry when it comes to broadening and deepening our trade relationships. And what I mean by that is as we see some of those big edifices like the WTO, the ways that we think about global trade rules being run over the course of the last 80 years, as they break down, we need to lean into the other groups that will crop up in their place. Rather than joining those people who are vandalizing the current system, we want to be the one who builds the alternative system that comes as a consequence of the current attack on the institutions that we see. These are the buffers to trade wars. I think we need to build them inside our businesses. And when it's within your own businesses, look out for those opportunities that are there when it comes to education and training that's relevant and stable for you, because those are things that we will continue to need. I'll circle back to where I started. If you don't take anything away, the things that I really want you to remember is first, history has returned. Your experience of the last 80 years are irrelevant. The world of the next 80 will be completely different. We get to choose how we act in that new world. There will be opportunities in the next 80 years because food and fiber will still continue to be in great demand because there'll be many parts of the world that will still get richer. The path will be less smooth. We need to understand our own context. How do we fit within this wider story? And what that means is, what are the levers we want to pull to what end? And I'd really love you to think about success in your business means making more money. Don't be ashamed of making lots more money. More profits and better wages for your workers are good things. Those are the yardsticks of success because that's what gives you your social license in your own business and your own community. Thank you.